All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be exploring a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty provocative book by Professor Mohammed Nur DOGAN. His whole argument is that the idea of religion, as many people in Islam understand it today, has been seriously distorted over the years. So he wants to take us all the way back to the source to see what it really meant. And this leads us to the core question of his entire book, the one that really frames everything we're about to discuss. What if the complex system of rules, rituals, and traditions that so many people call religion today is just fundamentally different from the concept the Quran calls deen? That's a huge question, and it points to a real crisis of meaning. So the author's main idea is that over the centuries, some really key Quranic concepts have been twisted, stretched, and in some cases totally emptied of their original meaning. And this, he says, has created a massive disconnect between the original message and what a lot of people are practicing today. And this quote from the author's preface just nails the problem he's trying to solve. He sees this drift away from what he believes is the divine will. And it's not because there's a problem with the source text, he argues, but because of how it's been interpreted and distorted throughout history. So what is this distorted version he's talking about? Well, he gives it a name. He calls it the fabricated deen, or the fabricated religion. He describes it as a system that's been built up over time, based more on human culture, traditions, and historical baggage than on the divine text itself. And he doesn't just leave it at abstract ideas. He gets very specific. He points to things that you can see and touch, like sectarian divisions, Sunni, Shia, and so on. He talks about the veneration of objects and tombs, and the belief that saints or prophets can intervene on your behalf. He even includes the belief in certain fables, like the Miraj, the story of the prophet's night journey, and argues that treating books written by humans with a reverence that should be reserved for scripture, well, that's all part of this fabricated system. And here's why this is so critical for him. He makes a really bold claim. He says this fabricated religion isn't just some theological mistake. He argues it's the root cause of some very real-world problems. He connects it directly to conflicts happening within Muslim societies and even says it's the stuff that fuels Islamophobia around the world. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? This is where the author shifts gears. He moves from diagnosing the issue to presenting what he argues is the actual Quranic definition of deen, based strictly on the language and context found within the text itself. So, the first and most fundamental meaning he pulls out is simply this: submission. The term is al-Islam. He argues it's not a cultural label or a list of things to do, but an internal state of being, the complete willing submission to the one God. And he points out that this was the same principle shared by all the prophets. Then there's a second layer. Deen also means God's guidance, or hudallah. So here, it's not just about that internal feeling of submission, it's also the external roadmap. It's the system of moral and ethical principles that God has revealed to help guide us. You could almost think of it as the divine instruction manual for how to live a good life. And third, right at the theological core of it all, is pure monotheism, or tawhid. This is the absolute non-negotiable principle that there is only one God, period. No partners, no intermediaries. The author really stresses that this was the single, unifying message of every single prophet throughout history. So now we have these two totally different pictures of what din is, right? On one hand, you've got this complex cultural system, and on the other, you have this idea of a direct relationship with God based on submission, guidance, and pure monotheism. Let's put them side by side and really see the difference. And when you look at it like this, wow, the contrast is just so stark. On one side, the author describes a din of human traditions that he says is complex, divisive, and often based on fear. But on the other side, he presents the Quranic din as being about God-given principles, simple and clear guidance, something that's unifying and ultimately liberating, freeing you from any authority except for God. The Quran actually has a specific term for this street path, Dinul Qayyim, which you can translate as the sound deen or the straight deen. The author explains this as a way of life that is in perfect harmony with what the Quran calls fitra, which is the natural, built-in disposition of every single human being. The idea is really cool. It suggests this religion isn't something foreign being imposed on you, but something that resonates with your deepest, most authentic self. So all of this leads to a pretty logical question. If there's such a massive gap between cultural practice and the original source, how on earth do you bridge it? Well, the author proposes a very clear path forward. His call to action is basically a three-step process. First, just acknowledge that the gap exists. Recognize that what's practiced culturally might be different from the text. Second, start questioning the intermediaries, all those layers of tradition and human interpretation that have built up over the centuries. And third, and this is the big one, return directly to the source. In the end, his entire complex argument really boils down to this one single, powerful piece of advice. He's not asking you to follow him or believe him. He's asking you to go past him, past all the other interpreters, and engage directly with the Quran to figure out what deen means for yourself. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Regardless of your personal faith or background, the author's work brings up a really compelling question about how we read any important text. How different might any foundational document, religious or otherwise, look if we could somehow read it with fresh eyes, completely free from the incredible weight of centuries of interpretation? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.